Our fourth theme is demographics. The world's population is aging, and this has dramatic long-term consequences for investors. Who's going to fund the big debts that have been created as the populations age? And we can see this in this particular slide. 60-year-olds are becoming a larger and larger percentage of population groups. By 2050, approximately 22% of the world's population will be over the age of 60. This is critical because 60-year-olds aren't workers, and GDP grows because you have to have a working class. So countries grow when workers go to work. And what this slide shows, very simply, is the number of people that are moving out of the working cohort and getting older and older, and countries are losing their working populations. We see that right across the developed world. It's important for the following critical reasons. Firstly, GDP growth is a function of two things: the number of people you have working and how productive they are. Now, to get more people into the population, you have to have babies, or you have to have immigration. And another theme that's very pervasive at the moment is nationalism and the removal of immigration across borders. So unless we have more people moving into certain countries, particularly Europe and the US, we're not going to have the right number of people entering the workplace and being productive. So that's an absolute pull in terms of GDP growth. There's, of course, always something positive when it comes to markets. And here we look at the demographics in terms of population growth overall around the world. So the world is expected to have 9 billion people by the year 2050. That's the graph on the left-hand side. What's important to notice, however, is the dark blue area. It's happening in the developing world and not the developed world. Only one country, major economy, is expected to have growth in their population, and that's the US over this period. The rest of the developed world is in fact shrinking. Now here's a key point with respect to that blue area. It's coming from two specific zones on the globe: Africa and Pakistan. Here's another key point. It's very difficult to predict fertility. It's very difficult to be sure that we will have 9 billion people on the planet. And I'll give you a simple example of how we know this. Iran, in the 80s, used to have a population growth rate of 5.6 children per family. 20 years later, that had dropped to under 2. You need at least 2 kids per family to keep the world's population at current levels. So when we prognosticate about rising population groups, we're assuming that the population growth rate will exceed 2 kids per family. But here's another key point. Is Africa going to drive GDP growth for the world? Because that's what we need. If population groups are diminishing in other countries and getting older, we need someone to pick up the slack. And unfortunately, what we know is that the top 10 nations 100 years ago were exactly the same top 10 nations bar Korea 100 years later. And Africa never made it into that top 10. So to get GDP growth, we need Africa to do a lot right for the world. On the right-hand side, we've got the emergence of the emerging market middle class. This is a key theme for asset managers. We can see that more and more population groups are rising in terms of being in the middle class. They consume more products. They're wealthier. It's good for demand. It's good for GDP growth. It's good for stocks.